Hello, welcome to the session. It's an on-demand session for Virtual Fox Fest May 2021. My session is called Inspiring Everyday Practical IntelliSense. This session is really designed to bring some ideas to you as a developer using Visual FoxPro and all the IntelliSense capabilities that are built into the product. My name is Rick Schumer. I'm the president of White Light Computing. I'm also a partner at Forward Thinking Software, which develops the Clever Fox backup product in use by a lot of people who are backing up Visual FoxPro and SQL Server data into the cloud. I'm a partner at Geek Gatherings, which puts on this conference, as well as Southwest Fox, our in-person conference that we put on in Phoenix typically every year, but has not gone on for during the pandemic. I'm an award winner of the FoxPro Lifetime Achievement Award. I've been a retired Microsoft MVP, but was an MVP for nearly 10 years. I'm an administrator with VFPX, and I've authored a couple of tools called HackCX, as well as the View Editor, which is something that we sell. I've co-authored 7 books available from the German FoxPro user group, as well as Henson work. And I've authored over 100 articles in various publications like Fox Rocks, Fox Talk, FoxPro Advisor, and Code Magazine. My blog, which doesn't get a whole lot of love these days, is called Shedding Some Light, but the most important bullet point on any of these slides is my email address, which you are welcome to send emails to for if you have any questions about this session or any other session I've done. So today we're really going to cover some fundamentals of IntelliSense. Not a whole lot of time is going to be spent in that. The majority of it's going to be real world examples of stuff that I use on a regular basis through some demos and some code reviews of those demos. The intention of this whole session here is to inspire you as a Visual FoxPro developer to really take advantage of IntelliSense, not only in the everyday sense that you've been doing, but possibly enhancing it to take advantage of some additional stuff to improve your productivity. We're also going to demonstrate some tools that are incorporated both in the product Visual FoxPro, as well as some external tools developed by some of the members in the community. All right, so why are we talking about IntelliSense in 2021? The reality is IntelliSense was first released back in 2001, which is literally 20 years ago. With the release of Visual FoxPro 7.0. I originally did a session, this particular session, which I've improved for this year, back in 2014, which was literally 7 years ago. And back then, I was finding I was underutilizing IntelliSense quite a bit. And in fact, when I started preparing for this session, I realized that I still wasn't taking advantage of IntelliSense, even with the scripts that I had created over the last 15, 20 years. And really, it brought an idea out to me that I needed to really do what I call the upgrade 2.0 for my IntelliSense usage, which really is to improve the repetition, remove the repetition of daily tasks and add productivity within my usage of Visual FoxPro. But the reality is I see developers that we mentor that don't use IntelliSense at all. We see people who use IntelliSense, but maybe not to the full extent of IntelliSense. And then I can tell you personally, as a metric of using IntelliSense and improving IntelliSense, that I use the help file only about 25% of the time overall. So let's go on to the next one. fundamentals. We're just going to cover a little bit of the basics within IntelliSense. So if we were doing this interactively, I'd be asking you to tell me what are the 7 places IntelliSense is used within VFP. Obviously, it's used in the command window. Obviously, it's used in the program editor. And obviously, it's used in the method editor. But some of you may not know it's actually used in the watch window within the debugger. It's used on the menu via menu hits. It is used in the property sheet via property editors. And it can be used within your applications as a runtime application. IntelliSense can be included within your application. I'm going to show one example of how I do that. All right, so IntelliSense functionality. We've got the syntax keyword completion. We've got quick info, list members, which is a drop-down list of properties, events, and methods within a class. We have list values that give you some values that are available for a particular property or properties. You have automatic table, column, and variable names. You have most recently used lists for files and folders. You have property editors and menu hits were both introduced in the version Visual FoxPro 9. And let's take some examples of that. All right. You're going to see I'm using Thor as my engine to drive my demonstrations here. Just built some menus on Thor to go through each of my examples. So we're in the base functionality here. In the base functionality, I'm going to just open a couple of, one table from Northwind as an example. But we can do basic command completion and lists. So as I hit the spacebar in this use command, it brings down the list of clauses that are available for this command as I'm using it. So if I type in shared, I can get again, I can come in and do no data and so on. That is just your basic, probably every day, everyone uses, if you're using IntelliSense, command completion. You also have list members. So if I come in here and do create object, it brings down quick info for me, which is really the tooltip that provides the base reason why I can tell you I use the help file only 25% of the time that I used to. Most of the time, I use quick info to recall any specific parameters or any specific settings that I need for a particular class. Now, because I came up here and I defined the local low checkbox variable as a checkbox, when I come down here on the command where I'm assigning something and I type in the period, it brings up the member list. And that is only because in this case, I told IntelliSense, or I told in the program, I defined that particular member as a checkbox. So that's a really powerful way of shortcutting to get the IntelliSense to enable itself to make you more productive. Also, that's not just for base classes that are intrinsic to VFP. You'll see examples later in the session where it works for your own custom classes as well. In the case here, I've also defined a variable, local word variable, as word.application, and that's basically the COM representation of automating Microsoft Word. So when I come in here and on the line down here where I'm using that reference, when I hit the period to initiate IntelliSense, I now have the COM object that has been exposed here in my program. And that is a great way to save a lot of time, especially when you're doing Word or Excel automation or automating a COM object of your own. Now, the other one that you can do, and this has to be done actually in the command window because it's a command window only. I'm just going to declare a public membar. And then if I do m dot, it brings up all the membars that are defined in that particular scope of the command window. If I use, because I opened up that employees table earlier, if I use, well, it's not because of the use statement, but if I use, because I have the database open, the Northwind database open, the use will drop down a list of database tables and local views or remote views if you have any defined within that DBC or any other DBC that you have open. All right. IntelliSense implementation. Everything for IntelliSense is defined in a data-driven manner. It's all done in foxcode.dbf, which is the IntelliSense metadata. That is typically located in the Home 7 folder, which is under your users, in your users folder in your C drive. But it could also be located anywhere you want it to be. You may also find it in the VFP folder. I will make one huge recommendation. Make sure you back up your FoxCode table before, during, after you make any changes to it. You can literally break IntelliSense if you screw up the table. I'll show you a couple of ways to back it up. And it's fairly straightforward. The IntelliSense Manager included Visual FoxPro is the user interface to the FoxCode table. The underscore FoxCode system member is the name and location of the FoxCode DBF. Underscore code sense is the system variable for the IntelliSense Manager. And there are things with the editor options for the under the VFP object, a global object within VFP that will also tell how IntelliSense is enabled or disabled. Let's take a look at that. So you have, like I was mentioning, your system variables here. And you can tell that I have my FoxCode table and under my user folder. And I have the program foxcode.app is located in my Visual FoxPro 9 folder. And I have these letters, which is my underscore VFP.editor options. The L is for list members. If it's uppercase L, it's automatic, and lowercase is manual. You can actually have your list members where you drop them down manually instead of having it automatically drop down. Quick info is the Q. The K is for hyperlinks, which is not IntelliSense related, as well as the T, which is also not IntelliSense related. You can turn off IntelliSense, which, believe me, I actually have seen developers who have done this. You can just do that by assigning the FoxCode system variable to a null string. You can also null string out your VFP editor options. as well, and that will do that. Or you can uncheck the enable IntelliSense in the IntelliSense Manager. The IntelliSense table, this is the last time you're going to see me demo it in a browse window. Oops, it's already in use. So here's the IntelliSense table. It's just a DBF and a very flat DBF. It has in it a bunch of records that drive the IntelliSense operations, and I'm not going to go into all that right now. We're going to really pretty much deal with this as we go through more specific examples. The IntelliSense Manager, you can just do the foxcode.app, or you can run the underscore codesense within parentheses. I think a lot of you are familiar with this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. You can enable or disable IntelliSense. You can set up your list members and quick info tips. You can define how you want your capitalization uppercase as it's meant to be, except if you're Doug Hennick, who likes his in lowercase, as well as many other people. I'm just making a joke there. Don't take it personally. The types are, as you saw earlier when I did the local as checkbox, I defined a variable. Those are available in here, and those can be checked on and off. You can also include your own custom classes. They do not have to just be the intrinsic ones that are included in VFP. And that's pretty much the list there. There's some custom, this is where you can use the IntelliSense Manager to add your own custom IntelliSense capabilities, whether it's code expansion or running scripts or doing anything else that you can do within IntelliSense. We're going to show you a much better way to do that instead of using that. The Advanced tab gives you the ability to do something. There's one key thing in here that you'll probably want to turn on, and that is to set your expand C operators to true, which is the value T, which gives you some auto expansion capabilities with C-type operations. And I'll give you an example of that when we go through some of the code. You can also do some maintenance. I'm not going to do these right now, but you can restore FoxCode if you really mess it up. You can restore it back to factory settings. You can clean up FoxCode, which does a pack. You can clean up your lists, which are your MRU lists, and so on. I'm not going to click on any of those. Those are all maintenance runs. So IntelliSense Manager is very, very basic, very easy to understand. All right. Okay, so that's pretty much that. Debugging. I'm only going to point this out once. To use a debugger when you're debugging your IntelliSense scripts, it's typically turned off. You can turn that back on using sys 2030, 1 to turn on the debugging within the IntelliSense. Otherwise, as you run IntelliSense, if it's turned on, it literally will not run, even if you put set step on. Code tips. This is something that I don't think many people are using at all. But code tips basically gives you, instead of the quick tips or a quick info tooltip that shows up right in your program, you can actually have it where the tooltip shows up in this quick tip window. The only reason that this might be useful is in the case of super long ones. If it extends past the tooltip limit, this gives you more tooltip text to show. You can release that programmatically using the object reference to the tooltip window .release, or you can click on the red X to get rid of it. A couple of tips as we're going through some of this that you're probably not going to see demonstrated, but just to give you a couple of things. The undo of an automatic expansion if you're doing something and you get an automatic expansion that you didn't like, you can do Control Z to get rid of it, and followed by the N key will take you to the end of the command. And then if you want to prevent command expansion, you can use Control Spacebar if you don't want, like here, if I want my ins to line up here in my text in these two use commands, if I hit space, 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 what it does is it takes it, the first space allows it to go in, but that assumes that you only want it one space to be entered. And it will then jump you in front of the in clause. If you want your ins to line up, you can do Control Space, and that will tell IntelliSense not to kick in while it's while you're doing some editing on your code. So just a quick tip there. All right, IntelliSense. Let's go into the FoxCode table just a little bit, but I am going to let's. Again, your FoxCode is located typically in your Home 7 folder. There's lots of IntelliSense help in the help file, in the Visual FoxPro help file. I have a couple of commands here that will take you to specific topics that are really useful. The table structure being one, which goes into details on what each column represents, how it's used, what it's used for, some of the settings, some of the enumerators, stuff like that that you're going to need, as well as the FoxCode object reference, which is passed into each IntelliSense script, which is super important to understand if you're going to be writing any code. You'll see some examples of that throughout the session today. I will tell you that the types, which is the type column in the IntelliSense code, IntelliSense table, you're going to have commands, which are autocomplete items. You're going to have E records, which are for property editor. You're going to have F records, which are for functions, which are triggered by open parentheses when you're going through your code and trying to trigger IntelliSense. You'll have M for menu hits, which is something we'll talk about more towards the end of the session. You'll have O for COM objects, which allows you to specify COM type library references, typically used as in a local or private or public declaration, as you saw, as Word.application. You'll have P for properties, S for scripts, T for object types, U for user defined, which you can do for your own custom IntelliSense stuff. B for version, which is only one record in the table. It's the first record. And Z for special. They don't have any automatic behavior, and you really have to configure it specifically for yourself. We're not going to go into a lot of in-depth stuff with those. Again, that's all defined in the help file. I'm pretty much going to let you guys read some of that on your own. I didn't mention this at the beginning. This session, typically our sessions at the conference go for 75 minutes. This session will not go for 75 minutes. It's going to probably close in on 2 hours. So there's a lot of stuff that I can't really go into in depth as much as I want to, so that we keep moving through it. So an easier way to go through and look at IntelliSense from my perspective, instead of opening up the FoxCode table and browsing it, which we all know is unsafe, it's unbuffered. You can accidentally type in a key and overwrite something accidentally and have no way to undo it, depending on the operations that you're performing on the table. So as you know, I like to develop tools. And so I built this tool back in, I think it was 2013, when I started doing a lot more IntelliSense work. it really gives you a lot more capabilities to do searching, to automatically do backups, to duplicate records so that you can take an existing record within the IntelliSense file and build upon it without maybe modifying one that already exists that Microsoft may have delivered for us. You can add new ones, of course, and you can delete existing ones if they are not useful anymore. It's completely buffered. You can actually, it has IntelliSense enabled into it for the script window, for the script or the data column. It allows you to generate unique identifiers, which are included in each record. There's a save column that you're going to want to check on. It's a logical column you're going to want to check on for each of your scripts so that if you ever do a cleanup or restore the IntelliSense file through the IntelliSense manager, it won't destroy your records. It will give you a timestamp so you just don't have to type in the date time that you're modifying records. It has a user column, as most of the meta files do in Visual FoxPro. It has a user column that you can use for whatever you want. You'll see that I'm using it to indicate which of the IntelliSense scripts are mine or ones that I wrote. It also gives you the ability to export them so that you can share them with the community. And you can also browse the table just like you normally would do. It also comes with the ability to sort it using some indexes that are not built into the native product. So let's just take a quick look at it. Don't want to spend a lot of time in it because from now on, whenever I go in to show any code for IntelliSense, I'm going to use the Hack IntelliSense tool before because it's much easier. So I'm just going to show a real quick one. One that I use every day almost, browse no captions. And that is one that will automatically expand to, if I type in BN, it will automatically expand to browse normal, no captions. That is something I do all the time. If I did something like backup FoxCode, as you can see, I'm just typing in this little search window. I have it filtered to show all records, but I can also specifically filter the record list down to any of these types that are within the table. If I come into backup, you'll see that there's code, and this is where the scripts are stored. If you actually write code, they're stored in the data column of the IntelliSense file. If you right click on that, it will give you the ability to bring it up in a program, a PRG, that's stored in the temp folder. And if you come in here, you'll see that if I typed in use, that we have full IntelliSense enabled within the PRG because we have IntelliSense enabled within Visual FoxPro. Click no. You can reverse changes so that will revert any changes that you have buffered in your within the table itself. You have to commit changes if you make changes and you want them saved. You can remove a record, you can duplicate it, you can add a new one. You can click on Backup IntelliSense. That will actually go and back up the IntelliSense file. In this case, it's backup 1. All right. So basically that gives you everything. We're going to talk more about each of these columns as we go along, what they mean, what the settings are, why you want to use it, what you have to do to set up specific types of IntelliSense, and so on. And I will let you read all about the rest of what we've done. Oh, I do want to give credit. When I first did this presentation, this tool, the Hack IntelliSense tool, did not have a lot of these features. Like for instance, the paste signature. You can actually put your own signature in here. My signature is our company name. You can paste your signature in. That was a feature that was added by Jim Nelson. The searching capability that you see at the top here, where it searches literally all columns, not just a specific column, that was added in by Eric Selje. So once the community got a part of this, you were able to have more features built in without one developer just participating. It was literally a collaboration of several. This particular tool you can get right now if you have Thor. Under Thor tools, under applications, is the WLC Hack IntelliSense FoxCode table option, and that will run it. So it's already pre-installed if you have Thor. All right, backing up IntelliSense. You saw you could do it from the hack tool, but we also have code that will do it. It's included in the demo, in the examples of for this session. Nothing fancy here. I mean, literally, all it's doing is figuring out if the file is available. You know, as long as you have FoxCode set, which Visual FoxPro does by itself, and if you haven't blanked it out, it should still be set. It goes through and it looks in the folder, and it goes through and it's looking for files that have underscore backup in it. It's actually the file name FoxCode underscore backup, and then a counter starting with 1. It's looking for the highest number, and we'll take the next number and build that into the file name. Then all I'm doing is literally using FoxCode. I select it. I do a copy to with the new file name with production if there's any indexes, which there normally are not. And then I spit up a message box that tells you what the backup file has been done. So if we run this will actually go through and back up my actual IntelliSense file, which is now backup number 40. So you can see that I have 40 backups in my IntelliSense file. I don't back it up every day, but I do back it up. And then I make sure that this folder is backed up, because not only is the IntelliSense file there, but there's the Data Explorer, there's some stuff if you're using GoFish. There's a lot of stuff that gets stored in the Home 7 folder. Okay. What's next? So let's go into some real world examples. Out of the box, you get command expansion. There's the C++ operators that I mentioned. There's some things that were added in VFP 8. So you have things like do case. What does that expand to? Do while. No shock there. DX. DX is something you can only do in the command window, which shows you that you can write different settings for IntelliSense to only be available in the command window versus, say, a program editor or a method editor. So DX expands out and runs my Data Explorer. For each is the for each loop. For end is the for end loop. If end is if else. I'm sorry, if and if. If else is the if else and if. Scan end. Text end. None of these should be a surprise. Try end is a try catch. With end is with end. And WS will run some code. Instead of expanding out or doing a code expansion, it will actually run code to set up a web service. And then if you're using or have enabled the C++ operators, I use this all the time. It will do ln.counter, turns out to be +1, minus minus is -1, plus equals is whatever this plus, and then you can type in whatever you want, 34, 42, whatever. Notice that it's not just variables, it can also be property, object.property references, minus, multiplication, and division. Okay. All that is built in. There's nothing there that is something I built or had to add. You can expand the out-of-the-box stuff. My do case, for instance, I believe do case came with 2 case statements. My do case comes with 3. And I know that I use at least 3 for the majority of my do cases. Sometimes they're more, but I don't typically use 2. So I added a third one. You'll see an example of something better later. Try end. I added this low exception member. I did that because I typically use that as my catch to member. And then if I use F6 or Control F6, which I built into Thor, that will actually take the member and define it. And if I define it as an exception, okay, all that was IntelliSense, right? That was one of the types that were declared in the IntelliSense manager, stored in the IntelliSense file. And then if I come in within this catch and I say, X equals low exception dot, now I have IntelliSense for an exception object so that I can get things like the error number, right? So it's just much more productive environment when you can take and expand upon the IntelliSense. And what I did there, I literally went in and try end. I literally went in and edited the one that Microsoft built, and I added on my my membar. You'll see the squiggly line. The squiggly line tells the editor that you want the cursor for the editor to be placed at that position whenever it's expanded out, that particular script expands out. It's really super handy if you're doing things that you'll see in a little bit. Okay. It's driving me nuts in my head. I keep wondering, are there any questions? If you have questions, again, since this is not an interactive session, which I really thrive on, just send me an email and let me know what I can do to help out. All right, some other command expansions. These are some that are built in as well. Some of them I've created myself. MC is the one I use, I don't know, I want to say 1,000,000 times a day. I know that's an exaggeration, but Modi command, Modi project, Modi form, Modi report, Modi label, my BN. This is something I created. It's browse normal, no captions. You'll see in a minute my use statements that help me out. Browse last, no captions. I put no captions in because for me, I don't need to see the captions. I need to see the column names, which is so much more important when you're working in code. My favorites that I also use all the time is use in. And you can see I put the squiggly line to position it after the use statement so I can type in, customer. Use no update. Use close, which that's how I close files, close tables or cursors. And then I also have one, use FoxCode. So because when I was working with FoxCode and poking in for this session in preparation, I'm using it and checking things out inside of it all the time. So what you'll see me do probably at least 10 times a day is use in bn, and all this is in the command window, of course. The use statements can be done in code in the code editor. bn can be done in as well here in the command window. right? And then I built a bunch of them for scatter gather when I'm using an object, when I want to do memo blank, when I want to just go to membar, when I want to go blank membar, and then gather object name and gather membar. Those are all pretty basic, fundamental, straightforward. The insert to, or I shouldn't say insert to, insert object, which is going from my membar low data that I typically use when I do scatters to name low data. And then I just have to do customer, and I'm set to go for that. Here's my membar insertion. So I can type in my cursor name, however I'm working with my data. So yeah, it works great. Just all of this is super shortcuts to save me typing. You know, IntelliSense by itself, out of the box, saves me a lot of typing, but building my scripts for shortcuts that I use on a regular basis is really the important part. Now, I will tell you, if there's one thing that you can take away from this session, and I'm reminded of this fairly regular basis, especially in preparation of this session, as I was relearning some of the things that I built for myself but had forgotten that I don't use all the time, is that when you build things into IntelliSense, new features into IntelliSense, new code expansions into IntelliSense, the hard part for this is that you have to build the habit for remembering to use this versus doing it the way your muscle memory has done it for the X number of years that you've been writing code in Visual FoxPro. So that's the one thing I want you to take away. If you forget everything else, that's the one thing that you have to remember, is that you have to build the habit to use the things that you add into IntelliSense. If you don't, you'll be like me, you'll remember them later. One of the things I do for code expansion is to help with bugs in Visual FoxPro. And this isn't necessarily well, I don't know if it's a bug or not. I consider it an annoyance minimally. And that is, if I run this report form command, I'm just doing a no console. I want to preview it, and I do to printer prompt. Okay. This is a pretty standard thing. But if I run this command, it gives the error, missing comma. Well, I know that I'm not missing any commas. It's a problem that's built into FoxPro, and it is strictly a problem because if you type a space here, if I look here, it says report form, no console, preview to printer prompt. That's the sequence that's in the tooltip that comes from IntelliSense. Now, I know that that is triggered because I've done this a million times, that it's because these are swapped. So if I have an RF script, so if I run my report X, no console to printer prompt preview, that will work. Now there's two solutions. One, I created RF because I do a report form, boom, I type in the report form that I want to run for the report, and the rest of it is done for me. I could also go into IntelliSense, into the report form command, and I could fix the tooltip so that it puts it in the proper order, but that's okay. That's one of the things that you can do, is to correct syntax documentation problems. CLS is something I do a lot when I'm debugging stuff out on the screen. It's something Rick Borup shared with me years ago. CLS is a clear, and that just clears the screen, just like at the DOS prompt. So if you've been a developer since the DOS days and you did CLS at the DOS prompt a million times, this is another way to do it in Visual FoxPro. And then there is my use, nope, that's, sorry. commands here. Go to code blocks. So common code blocks are things that I write regularly. It's not something that's going to show up in a function because it's just something that you typically are writing in a code block on a regular basis. You don't use it every minute of every day, but it's just something to shortcut and simplify things. So if I come in here and run the code. Now, if I hit space on MB here, on the line here in code, that doesn't work. It's not a code expansion. It's a function. It's defined as a function within the IntelliSense table. So I can only expand that by bringing the open parentheses in. So if you have standard IntelliSense enabled to code expand message box, you have to type in message B parentheses. I shortened it to MB, and then I can do whatever I want to do after that. I created my own Windows message box, and when I do the parentheses there, it fills in some stuff for me. I know that I typically do, 16, whatever it is. I have my caption. If I have IntelliSense enabled, it will Control I will bring up the quick info if it doesn't trigger, and that gives me my things, my enumerators. It doesn't give me my um, constants, which is a whole different approach. If you're using constants in all your message boxes, then maybe you'll want to put those into your quick info within IntelliSense itself, which is actually probably a really cool idea. And when you think of it as you're giving the presentation, it's just not prepared for it. All right, I already mentioned how I do my local low exception as exception, how I create that using the built-in Thor tools. I also have in it, when I'm doing developer tools, I have a message exception. When I click on that, it does a code exception expansion, which brings up some very rudimentary information that I capture when I'm capturing errors within developer tools. Things like other IntelliSense scripts or Thor tools that I've built over the years. You'll see a lot of this code for my error handling within those tools. Other common code blocks, I think this wait window, no wait. I don't typically put this in production code, but for developer tools, Thor tools, I will do it. I think Bodwin out in the Netherlands shared this on probably the Fox Wiki. Wait window, no wait, no clear. If seek, that's just a common thing that I have in code. We do FoxPro DOS development, and I use the Visual FoxPro editors to do editing of my DOS PRGs. We have an if seek D that Dave Hanna created years ago to include the third parameter or three parameters that you get in a Visual FoxPro seek, but in DOS you don't have the tag parameter for seek, so we have a function to do that. My select DOS just gives me some rudimentary select statements and things I know I'm going to have in every select statement. DOC is not documentation. Heaven forbid I do any of that. DOC is a case statement. How many cases do I want? We'll do 6. And now it expands out 6 case statements. We'll take a look at that in a second. And then the self test is code that I put in classes to test out the classes. And that is just a function or method within those classes. And here's some rudimentary outline or skeleton code that I include in my self-test. So let's take a look at a couple of those examples. Since we got actually some code examples, we'll take a look at those in the hack tool. Let's look at Windows message box. You can see here it's got a bunch of code. Every script coming in that you write is going to, that's got code in it and code involved with it, is going to have the FoxCode object. I'm not going to go into the FoxCode object. There's just a ton of documentation in the help file. But there's some certain things that you're going to want to do. In this case, I'm checking using the FoxCode object. I'm checking the location. Now the location is documented up here. You have the command window, program editor, menu snippet, code snippet, or store procedure. What I'm doing here is if this is not a program, a code snippet, or a store procedure, all I'm going to do is return what was typed in by the developer in the program editor. So if I just typed in WMB into a menu snippet, it would not run. It will not run this script. I'm going to return a V, which is going to be a value that I'm returning, which is going to be the code that I want generated. And I'm using a technique here that Andy Kramick did years and years ago to help with indentation. So however you have it indented, it will bring your code indented at the same level. I use spaces. So my code handles spaces. If you use tabs, you may have to do something different. But I'm definitely a spaceman. So here's the code that's generated, which is message box. You can see the squiggly line, the squiggly tilde is positioned between the quotes of the caption or the message that I'm going to actually display. It indents it. It includes a 0 and then my underscore screen dot caption as the title for the box. This is all done in a text merge code. In this case, I use text merge, and it's putting it to the LC return value, which is returned from this script. That's what's returned to IntelliSense Engine. That's what's dumped into the program editor. Okay. So I had to build that as a function. You can see that as the type up here under the grid. The abbreviation is the WMB. It's going to be the squigglies for the command to tell it to run the script in the data column. It's going to return mixed case. You can define that to be uppercase, unchanged, lowercase, whatever your preference is. The unique ID is just something that you can click the ellipsis here to generate. I encourage you to click save so that IntelliSense Cleanup does not overwrite your record. In this case, there's no tooltip. You have a time source, and then here's the user column, which gives you some documentation of who I originally found things from as I was learning, and I made some enhancements to it. All right. The other one I'm just going to show you is MB, and that is the one that is actually built into or was released by Microsoft. It was built into the native IntelliSense file. Now, I didn't actually create, or MB is not the one that's built in. I created this one. But what I did is I literally did a duplicate of the message B record. And that message B record is what actually brought in the base of my code. And then I just shortened it to, instead of message B, I just shortened it to MB, and I literally used everything else that Microsoft provided. So nothing special there, but what I'm showing you there, or what I'm showing you here is you can take existing records that are already in your IntelliSense file, duplicate them, and then modify them to your needs. All right, fixing typos. I have mental blocks on a few muscle memories that as my fingers go on the keyboard, when I want to want to type in return, I often type in run. When I type in endif, I often type in ednif. And when I type in modi, I often type in moid. So instead of fixing my mental muscle memory problems, what I thought would be easier is just to have IntelliSense fix my problems. And yes, that is the lazy way of doing things. But when you're typing in and you're doing the same stuff and you're making the same mistakes, you might as well just have something help you fix it as you're typing it in so that you don't have to backspace and fix things. That is probably the laziest thing I've done with IntelliSense, but it works and it works well. Source code headers. Source code headers are super critical for me to understand what the program is supposed to be doing, documentation on anything special, who wrote the program, when it was done, copywriting, parameters that you pass in, how to document those parameters, and what changes were made to the program by who. Now, I know that a lot of developers use program headers. I'm not saying that what I have in my program header is the end all be all, but it works for me and my team. And I just don't want to have to type it in, and I don't want to copy and paste it every single darn time. So I built a couple of scripts to do that. So we have a self-test method here. I'm going to do my method header first. And so the method header, I have to literally come in, copy the method name, and I start typing in some description. And if I have any parameters, I have to put those in. Now, does my code go in and read this list of parameters? No, I have to copy them up. But I have all this code generated for me, all these comments generated for me. I'm sure it could be more sophisticated to go in and grab the parameters. That would take a lot more sophistication, and I just needed something quick to get me a head start. Puts in my name, puts in the month and year that I created this, and so on. The program header is a little more sophisticated. It will actually read the name of the program. It doesn't get the proper casing on it, but that's okay. I can easily fill that in. I then copy that down to the syntax and paste those in. It puts in my copyright, puts in the name of our company, our address, the email address of the developer who wrote it. It puts in my name and the month that it's created. You have your calling syntax. You have to put in your input parameters, your output parameters, and so on. It documents what version of our source code standards. It even will pick up the version of Visual FoxPro in case there is any doubt that this code can run in earlier versions of FoxPro. That has to be overwritten. It just pulls in the current version of FoxPro that's being written with. Brings in the date, my name, and then the program was created on that date. And then from now on, I just create my new lines in here. I'm sure I could have IntelliSense scripts to automate some of that as well. Again, thinking on the fly of things and ideas that you come up with. In fact, I'm writing that one down as well. Because that would be really simple to write. So anyways, things that, this is something that we use for every program. The method headers are, in classes and so on. And I use method headers as well for different procedures and functions in larger programs as well that may not be actual class methods, but I use the method header for um, multi-function, multi-procedure programs as well. HTML. Let's jump in here and do HTML. I don't do a lot of HTML. I don't use Visual FoxPro to edit web pages or do anything like that. But a good example of this is all the emails that we send out for our conference update 1, 2, and 3 that we send out in the 10 days before the conference, all are generated from programs. And all the text that you see is built up, data-driven, program-driven, and so on. And so I will do a lot of text and text code blocks that I use within those programs. And so when I want to do H1 tags, I can just click on that and then type in, my update heading, H2 tag, paragraph tags, and HL for my hyperlink. So it just gives me shortcuts to quickly edit the HTML tag that I generate in those emails. Just more handiness, it may not apply to every single person, but if you think about other things that you write in code, or if you're writing things in memo files, because IntelliSense is enabled in a memo file, and you want to save shortcuts or have shortcuts that generate text automatically, this is the perfect example of where you would be able to use that. All right. And then there are other ones. I don't know if I have one in here for order. I don't have those in here. Include those. Exporting data. Now, I don't use these all the time. In fact, when I was reviewing this session, I had to be reminded that I actually had some of these. I'm just going to open up the FoxCode table. Data to clip is not something you use in programs, but sometimes I use it when I'm doing my white papers. When I generated a lot of the stuff in this white paper, I had to pull out examples from the FoxCode table and insert it into the white paper for example. So data to clip is an easy way to do that. I don't always remember all the parameters the data to clip, but I do know that when I pop this one in, it will actually dump out the top 5 records of FoxCode in a tab delimited format, which is what the number 3 is. Data to clip with space delimited, the 10 records, that gives me just a different way to export it. Now, that's not super useful in a lot of cases, but it saves me from understanding all the parameters and stuff. I mean, I can do Control-I to bring up this, but it doesn't tell me in that tooltip what the third parameter value is. It just tells me that it's a variant in a clip format. It doesn't tell me what 1 means. Copy to is something that I do have code to do, but when I'm debugging stuff, I typically want to see things dumped to Excel so that I can look at it. It's a little bit easier sometimes than with the browse, especially with the search capabilities of Excel built in. So if I click space on this, not only does it dump the code to Excel, but it actually opens up Excel with the file in it. And this is literally all the records for IntelliSense dumped and open, and it automatically uses shell execute to open up Excel. The CSV, same thing, but this time I had to dump it and then modify file automatically or programmatically. And you can see in the script, I also returned the name of the file that it generated with the actual copy to command that it generated. And then this one is copy to CSV, but it also opens it up in Excel. So you can actually have it open up or shell execute the native file format. If you have your native file format be, Notepad++ or whatever, you can have it open up in whatever your favorite tool is. We'll take a look at some of this code because it's actually got some interesting things in it. We're going to do that through our hack tool. So C2. Here's the C2 Excel. When I come in here, I have my FoxCode object. I'm creating a file name. I do a copy to, I build the script, the copy to command, which is what's returned back to the editor. And then I run copy to in the code. So in this case, I'm copy to XL5. Noting from tomorrow's session, you don't want to use XLS, which I don't. I use XL5. I was happy to hear I was doing it the right way when she did her session at the conference. And then I shall execute. And all the shall execute is doing is running a procedure here. And this really shows something that if you don't think about it, you may not do it. And it's something I didn't really think that you couldn't do, but I did anyways. And that is that your script file doesn't have to be just one contiguous program. You can literally put in procedures or functions just like a regular program, because all IntelliSense is doing internally is an exec script on this code. So don't be afraid to have multiple programs. You can have classes, define classes, and all that can be put in to your IntelliSense scripts or programs. So all this is doing a Windows API declaration for shall execute, and the program's just calling it to execute whatever open is defined in the registry for the extension XLS, which is Excels. In my case, it runs Excel itself. That's it for that, for showing that. So I just wanted to point out that you can run multiple scripts, or multiple programs within that script. Okay, backups. You can use, actually I don't have to do this. I showed you how you could use the hack tool to do backups. You could do a program to do backups. I built IntelliSense to back itself up. So that you saw last time I did backup 40. This is backup 41. It's the same code. It's just built into the IntelliSense file. And in this case, it brings back the name of the backup file and what time I ran that. So you can see that I recorded this on Saturday the 8th. It is already 4:51 in the afternoon. All right. The code for that, I mean, it's not really, I mean, it's the same exact code. Backup FoxCode. And this is the exact same code that I showed earlier, where you build the file name, copy to with production, and message box the file name. No magic. It's just stored in the IntelliSense file. Gives me a quick 4-letter keyword to get it to run, and it's faster than running the IntelliSense, the hack tool, and then clicking back up IntelliSense, which is the same type of code. All right, frameworks. One of the frameworks, I mean, we use almost every commercial framework based on some of the applications we've inherited from other developers. We use, MaxFrame, we use Fox Express, we use CodeMine. We have our own internal in-house white light framework and so on. Frameworks have a lot of stuff built into them that are IntelliSense enabled. Some frameworks don't come with any IntelliSense enabled in them. I built one thing that I was doing quite a bit, which was the factory tool within Visual FoxExpress. I have a number of applications that I built with FoxExpress. The factory is basically a create object of the factory object, which is all metadata driven. But I never remember all the various items that are in that metadata that are factory driven. So I created a factory script, which brings up a list box of all the various items or classes that are built into the Visual FoxExpress factory. Now, the idea of the factory is you have a record and then you define which class you want to instantiate whenever you call that factory or create object on that factory class. So if you can use the built-in class for about form, for instance, or you could overwrite it with your own class. Well, to do that, you do it very generically in code. And by the way, note that this dialog here is actually a dynamic form, which is a VFPX project. And I'll show you how I did that in a minute. So this dumps in the code that calls the application object, factory object, get class method for the about form. I no longer have to remember all this code or the identifier for that factory class. So in this case, I'm going to create the class and it creates the object reference to it. And I just come in here and I type in what I want it to be referenced to. So that's a little time saver. There's a ton of things you can do with frameworks. You can have it reference specific properties within the framework classes. You can have it do code blocks for different code blocks that are common that you're going to code within your framework and so on. To me, this is just a huge time saver. To do this, I created a code script. Let's go to the top. You, of course, got to get your FoxCode object. I have to tell it where my factory table is. I hard coded that. I'm sure I could data drive some of that as well. It's just simpler to hard code it because it's on my machine. I need the alias of that factory table because here I'm going to close it. And then I'm going to open it again, shared, give it an alias. And then I'm selecting from that table all the records ordered by the description field. And I put that into a cursor. As long as there's records in that cursor, I'm going to go build the dynamic form. Now, dynamic form is also hard-coded. I have it loaded, download it from VFPX through the check for updates. And that gets dumped into a folder where I want it updated. So in this case, I instantiate the dynamic form. I'm setting that form's caption, which is the top caption of the title bar caption. The heading on the form, I'm going to use a font size of 12. I'm going to put all labels for my object, which in this case is one list box, above the list box. I'm going to define this public variable that I have set up, which is going to give me my return value from the list box. And that is going to default to the first record in the table. And then you build your markup script within this text end text. I only have the one membar that I'm going to bind this list box to. I enable it to true. It's a list box. It's going to have two columns. I'm binding the column, the list box to the first column. I have some column widths. The row source is the cursor. Row source type is alias, I believe. I have the width and height defined, and then the label to this list box is going to not have a bold font, and it's just going to be called factory classes. And that's then created as the markup. I assign the markup for the form to the one that was just generated through the membar. I render the form. If it renders okay, then I auto center the form and I show it. And that's what displays with the whole list of all the items in the factory table. If it doesn't, then I give a message box with the error string. Most of this code is generic right from the example of dynamic forms. If the object for the form exists and it was returned as a save, meaning I click the save button, I then have a variable called lcode factory, which I assign value returned back from the list box. I release the form. I then generate the code within a text and text block that you saw displayed in my program. Okay, and it's squiggly tilde on the object reference variable that I'm going to type in. But it doesn't return anything. I just return space, which means nothing. I close my factory table. You got some code for an error log. And then I return a value type, which is the code that was generated. And so that really is it. This is showing you that I'm using, instead of, I'm presenting a UI, and that UI is by dynamic forms. And I didn't initially understand why Matt did dynamic forms until I started thinking about developer tools and not having to build forms, especially in IntelliSense, because the IntelliSense table has all the code in it. Where am I going to put a SCX form or a VCX based form that IntelliSense is going to find every time? Having dynamic forms circumvents that need, and it allows me to build forms fairly quickly using a little bit of scripting code for markup. So thanks, Matt. I know I didn't have a lot of faith initially when you brought it out, but I use dynamic forms not only in developer tools with IntelliSense, but other developer tools that I create. I also use it for backdoor code that we allow our customers to run within our applications. And I use it within a lot of Thor scripts and a lot of Thor tools that I build as well. All right, let's catch up on our slides. Well, got about a half hour, a little more than a half hour. This is the director's cut. Instead of the 75 minutes, you're getting bonus time in a bonus session. It's great. Backups, we did frameworks. All right, so Booster, IntelliSense Booster. So tricking IntelliSense, this is one trick that I learned to trick IntelliSense to think it is using a specific class. One of the things that I did a lot, I still do a lot. I build my classes in VCXs. I know that there are some potential issues with VCX-based classes that are where the code is stored in it, so it can be much easier to decompile. And I know there's some security issues that Christoph has presented about with VCXs. I still use them. I have mitigated, or I should say, I've managed my risk with VCXs, but the idea that you can do code-based VCXs is a lot easier for things like checking in source code without having to go through the text flattening of your VCXs. But anyways, going to and migrating to class-based VCXs presents a different problem. And that is that it kind of doesn't always work with IntelliSense. So years ago, Paul Marzowski was presenting a presentation, one of his many presentations he's done for the Detroit area Fox user group. And he was talking about IntelliSense, and he was talking about some other coding technique that he was working on. And I saw him do this in a PRG-based IntelliSense script. And that is, he had a this, and he hit dot, and he had his member list drop down. And I did not understand how that worked. And in reality, Paul had more code like this, where he was not showing his trick. So I'm going to share his trick with you, and that is you can define local, a variable as this, as whatever your class is, okay? And this can be, again, in this case, it's an iBiz object, which is a intermediate business object that is part of the Visual Fox Express class libraries, part of the framework for business objects, okay? And so if I define my iBiz object, my this as an iBiz object, when I click this dot, it has the members from the iBiz object class, not just the intrinsic properties, methods, and events, but also the ones that are custom to that particular class and all its superclasses. Okay, this is super powerful if you are doing coding in PRG-based classes and IntelliSense is not working for you for one reason or another. Now, make sure that you take the pound_if dot false so that this line of code is only used for the editor, not for running in your production application. By doing pound_if false, pound_endif, that will not be compiled into your executable. Okay. Now here I've got a defined class. Notice this was not in a class. The code up here was not in a class. The code in the class here, when I do this dot in this header class, it does have the header caption and so on, all the properties that I can define for a header. So it does work within a defined class. Sometimes that is using a intrinsic class of header. It's Visual FoxPro base class header. Now here I have a customer business object of iBiz object, and it has in it this framework for iBusiness object, which is the same as I had above. But here, when I do dot, it's broken. It does not, fails. And if I comment this out, I think it's here, it works. So, but it doesn't, what it's doing here is it's not doing the iBiz object class. It's just doing the custom class. Or really, no, I don't even think it's base class. Looks like a text box class. So there are IntelliSense fails, and these are things that you have to be careful of, or at least know about. But that's an IntelliSense booster. The other one I brought up earlier, and that was local word as word.application. By doing that, I can do low word dot, and now I'm working with the com object of word, so I can get the active document dot and so on. Very, very powerful if you're doing com automation or working with com objects. If this does not work, if you find that when you do low word dot, it does not bring up your member list, just come up to the local definition that you have and hit enter. I don't even know if you have to do the enter. You may just be able to scroll through it, and it will, the editor will pick it up and enable the IntelliSense behind it. All right. Let's see, we probably should catch up on. All right. All right, more tool ideas. So one of the things I mentioned earlier is that you can use it at runtime. I have seen presentations, I believe it was Tony Feltman who presented this within an idea of you don't need to use necessarily code. You can enable IntelliSense to do more than just code. You can do keywords. Say you're writing a medical app, and in the medical app, they track information about a patient, but they just have a bunch of simple shortcut um, letters that represent or could be included in an evaluation. That evaluation, you can include IntelliSense, a FoxCode table that doesn't have any FoxCode programming shortcuts or keyword expansions, but you could put in medical terminology keyword expansions and open up a memo editing window. And when you type in the memo editing window or open up a PRG, a modicum of a text window, effectively, that they type in their evaluation, they could put in these keywords or key letters and have it expand out to keywords. Okay, I think Tony used that as her example. Stonefield Query has the ability to write scripts, and it uses IntelliSense in it. I'm certain that Doug is using runtime IntelliSense in Stonefield Query to do that. I used it in our runtime command window. And so I'll show you our runtime command window. This is not included in your demo. It's more of a inspiration to what you can do. This is what the command window looked before. So if I did modicom, but actually the IntelliSense is not built into the edit box, unfortunately. And it is not built into the program editor in this version because it's not IntelliSense enabled. So let me close this and bring up the enhanced version. And this brings in, it shows that I've included the FoxCode table. Actually, I have the wrong folder I'm using, but that's okay. Foxcode.dbf and the foxcode.app is set to the underscore code sense variable and the underscore FoxCode variable for the table. Okay, and it shows me which runtime I'm running. So if I do modicom and I do use in, it's got my script, my use script, customer. And so now I have the ability to write programs in a runtime command window when I'm connected at a customer site that doesn't have Visual FoxPro installed. And that has a lot of power to save me time instead of me remembering all the syntax because I don't have the FoxPro help file available, although I could release the help file and put that in my command window now too, because the help file is part of VFPX under open source. Another great idea that I just thought of while I'm presenting. I'm writing down some notes. Anyways, this is what this is doing, is just showing you that you can include IntelliSense into your applications, whether you run it, you have a backdoor command window that you allow customers to run, or you have a command window that you deliver with your application so that your team supporting your customer can look behind tables, look at tables, run scripts, run programs, write repair utilities for data, and so on. So all that can have IntelliSense in it. And that really has brought some extra capabilities to our command windows. In fact, we have a couple of products that are released without this IntelliSense built into it. And I kick myself every time I have to run it because I don't have my IntelliSense available to me. The only thing you have to do in your program, in your released exe, your runtime exe, in the startup of your program, you have to set your underscore FoxCode sysmember. You have to set your underscore code sense variable to your foxcode.app. Now, one thing that should be pointed out here is you can release the FoxCode app that you use with Visual FoxPro, or if you so see the need or find a reason to improve upon, you can release your own FoxCode app. And it doesn't have to be called foxcode.app. You could call it, my IntelliSense code.app. You deploy your FoxCode app, your program, your runtimes, and the FoxCode DBF that you want enabled with your runtime, and that is pretty much it. In the white paper for this session, I've included a link to Doug's white paper where he goes in depth with some of the stuff that you have to do for runtime IntelliSense. You have to also deploy, if I didn't mention, you have to deploy the foxcode.app, whatever one you deliver. So anything you want to do with it, you're free to do with it. Again, if you have any questions on some of this stuff, my email address is included in the white paper at the beginning of this session and at the very end of this session. All right, let's go into IDE extensions. So everything that we've done so far is what you normally see within the program editors. You can see how we've extended it to do things outside of normal code expansions. You've seen how we've been able to fix some things within the IntelliSense file, how you can edit the IntelliSense file. But in VFP 9, Microsoft incorporates something else in IntelliSense file called property editors. Now, in the interest of time, to keep this under 2 hours or around 2 hours, I'm not going to go in depth into property editors, but I do want to point out that the implementation of property editors is within the FoxCode table. I will demonstrate a little bit, but if you really want more in-depth knowledge on property editors, I really encourage you to go to the YouTube channel for Geek Gatherings where you found this video, and go to last year's session on that I gave on builders. And one of the cousins to builders is property editors, and I gave a presentation on property editors within that session that is going to be more in depth than I have time for within this session. So property editors. So if I create or if I modify a class, I modify this class and I come in here, this is just a standard checkbox, nothing fancy. If I come in here and I click on anchor and I click on this ellipsis on the property sheet here next, right under the favorites tab, it brings up the anchor editor. The anchor editor is a built-in property editor, okay, for the anchor property. So again, it's an editor for a property. It can be extended past that, but I don't want to get into that. That's just going to blow the lid off of this and take way, way too much time. So anyways, your property editor for anchors is the anchor editor that Doug wrote for Microsoft for VFP 9. You have a back color. Back color is going to bring up the color dialog that's been around since the beginning of time. If you use it on the name, can't do it on name for this one because it's a class. If you did it on name, it would bring up an input box to collect the name for whatever object you have on a form, and so on. So there's built-in property editors that are available to you. You can create your own property editors. So I have this property. Now, I have done this a million times. You click on a logical property within intrinsic property that's included in FoxPro, and I double click on it. It toggles it between false and true. And then I have my own custom properties that if I could click on them, I would want them to toggle between false and true. And we know that that doesn't work, except when I click on it, it actually does. And the reason for that is I created a property editor for else security enabled. Okay. So let's just take a look behind the scenes. Again, I'm not going into super in depth for this, but I at least want to show you where to go look and where to find the information. On the hack tool, there is a drop down here. I've been filtering on all during the whole presentation. There is a list of property editors. I'm just filtering on property editors right now. There are none called factory, of course. And so in here, it's going to show you exactly the records that are created for the caption property, the anchor property, the member data property. So that will run the member data editor, the name property, which brings up an input box, security, and so on. So when you look at name, name is something I created. If you look at anchor, and it comes in here, it runs a script called the anchor editor. So mine is coded in the wizards folder. And that's what it's going to do whenever you click on the ellipsis button. That is just the generic shortest thing you can do is run the script called do and then whatever it's going to run. If you look at else security enabled, I'm running a script where I'm running the IntelliSense manager code, but I'm passing in it a parameter that says run a property editor. And when you run the property editor, it's for else security enabled. Okay. That's a whole different ballgame. That's where it gets really complicated. Again, I don't want to go into all the details, but this is showing you that, well, in this case, I'm running a script in this command column. I run a script called WLC logical script. And that is what's run when it runs through this member data. We go to the script. It's not in this list. It's in the scripts. And if I go down to my script, in here, I have all the code that will actually do the toggling of the property. And it really boils down to getting a reference to the control on the class or form. The property is passed in, determined what it's going to be, and I just flip it from whatever logical value it was to whatever it's going to be. And that's it. That's all I really want to show on property editors. Unfortunately, because of time and losing my voice after 2 hours, I'm certain I'm going to lose it. I'm not going to go into great depth with it. If you have any questions, please, first of all, go listen to the builder session and read the white paper that comes with this session to get you more information on property editors. Menu hits is a whole different animal, and that's something I haven't covered before. It is specifically for IntelliSense. And what menu hits are is the ability to go in and replace native dialogues that are run from the VFP menus, both the main menu. So if I came in and let's modify that class again. If I come in and run a new method or new property or edit property method, that would bring up the native dialogues that Microsoft ships. I haven't seen those native dialogues in decades. I think we replaced these within 6 months of Microsoft showing this capability to do that. The edit method property brings up the PEM editor. So if you're using PEM editor, which I'm not sure you can run it without Thor, but if you can, it'll bring up the PEM editor. Originally, Marcia Akins, rest in peace, Marcia, wrote a replacement dialogue that Jim Nelson turned into the PEM editor. The PEM editor does a lot more than the edit method dialogue did, which was also a confusing dialogue to use, if I remember correctly. So what we're doing here is we're replacing dialogues that are run from native FoxPro menus. Now, we could have overrun the menu with our own design custom developer menu, but in this case, this is the native FoxPro out-of-the-box menu that is going into the IntelliSense file, realizing that there is a menu hit defined for it, and then doing something else. It is also available for shortcuts in the property dialog. So when I click on the right click on the auto size, it brings up a menu that has the PEM editor available on it. Now, the PEM editor is not native to Visual FoxPro as much as many of us may think it is because we've been using it for so long. It is something that Jim Nelson created and is now available on the shortcut menu. That is also a menu hit. Basically, this whole menu is being recreated to include the PEM editor. So that is really what's kind of powerful, very powerful in the fact that we now can change things without asking Microsoft for enhancements, because as we know where that goes these days, it's just not available. The other one is a new dialogue. I created this as my my way to learn how to work with menu hits. So I created a dialogue to replace the file new dialogue. All right, and mine just works the same way. It just has a few things on it. It allows you to run the wizard or create something new direct using ModiCom, ModiForm, Modi projects, create project, and so on. I'm not going to show that. I will show you how you work with these. And I'm going into the hack tool again. Here we bring up menu hits. Now, if you bring up yours, if you have out-of-the-box FoxCode, I am fairly certain, unless you have installed the PEM editor, that you will not see anything here. The new option was the one I wrote. The new property and new method is something that Doug wrote right out of the box when we learned about this. Doug created a new property dialog, and I still use it. Even though most people have moved on to the PEM editor, I still use PEM editor as well. Just depends on what circumstance I'm in. Doug's new property dialog, new method dialog, bring in one key thing that is really important to me. If I come in here and do class, new property, and I type in, I don't know, security. Security actually. And when it comes in, it automatically defines it public visibility, but it defaults. It creates a default value. Since I did L, it's illogical. If I did C, it would be a blank character. If I did a date, it'd be squigglies, squiggly brackets, I believe, and so on. It creates a default value. He also has use a toggle editor, which is a property editor enabled feature that he's going to add to this logical variable, and then allows me to type in my description. All that brings in and also retains the member data, the case, if I want it that way, and allows me to do add and close or keep adding. And this dialog is also not going away. It's not modal like the native dialog was. So I still use that from time to time. It's the same with the new method. It just adds a method and so on. So let's go back to the editor. If we look at edit property method, and we look at the code, it's actually quite straightforward. It's looking for the PEM editor instance or object reference. If it doesn't find it, or actually if it does find it, releases it, and then it just creates a new one. And then it starts the PEM editor and shows the form. So in reality, the code here is very straightforward. The class for PEM editor uses some code here to do a new object. I think that there may be other ways to do this through Thor, where you can get a reference to PEM editor through Thor as well. I've been using this code 15, 16, 17 years maybe. I don't remember. A long time. And that's all there is to that. That's how you replace. Now, what Visual FoxPro is doing under the hood is for a menu hit that's replacing off the main menu, it's basically looking for the caption for that menu, for the menu itself. So in this case, it's the edit property / method. So if you, per se, wanted to replace macros, you would put macros ... in here in your menu hit. Okay. Nothing else here is important other than making sure that it's a type menu hit. Unique ID, maybe click the save so that it saves your menu hit if you ever replace or update the FoxCode table. And then add your script to run the code that you want to run in place of the native dialog or the native menu behavior. Doesn't even have to be a dialog. It could be a process that runs, and so on. Now, you see this 24460. That is not a menu caption, right? That is actually the abbreviation number for the right-click menu on the property dialog, or the property sheet dialog. Okay, and that is, how do you know that? Well, you have to figure it out. You have to. I don't know of any documentation. There may be some documentation somewhere that gives all the shortcut menus within Visual FoxPro so that you can overwrite those. I'm not aware of them. What I would probably do is use the code itself, and looking at the parameter, you can use the parameter to see if it's, what properties are being passed in to this particular IntelliSense script that's running. So in this case, this code is super complex. In fact, some of it, I don't know if it would be defined as magic, but it could be considered difficult to understand. I'm not sure if Doug wrote this or Jim wrote this, maybe a combination of them. But there is a lot of interesting information in here to position the menu and build the menu. All right. Most of the code up here is looking to position the menu on top of the property sheet, which initially it did not. When you right-click on the property sheet, the menu is positioned off the property sheet. Natively, it did not put it right on the property sheet. So a lot of this magic is defining where that menu should show up. It looks at to see if the object that we're working with is a read-only object. That's going to determine whether menu options may be enabled or disabled depending on what you're trying to do, what the menu is for, and what your options are on that menu are for. So if it's not read-only, what we're doing is basically recreating the menu that you see for the property sheet. Reset the default, zoom, the expression builder, and then if it's a custom property, you can remove it, adding additional bars, and then the PEM editor. Once we get to the PEM editor, then we add the menu, the member data editor, another button, add favorites, which is basically adding the rest of the menu that was already there. All it's doing is adding in the PEM editor. Okay. And that's really the magic behind it. Now, this is super complicated, but with this example and some documentation that you can find in the help file, as well as scoping out Doug's articles on menu hits, is going to be my suggestion for going in and figuring out what to do for menu hits. I will tell you that you can see that there are only 5 that I have. This one, the shortcut for the property sheet was created by someone else. The menu for new property, new method, I believe is created by Doug and registered when you first ran his tool to do those dialogues. The PEM editor registered and put this menu option in. I only created my new dialogue. And all my code does is really straightforward. It creates an object reference to a form. It's in a VCX and it shows it. And then it returns true. And that's it. It runs my dialogue. The dialogue handles everything that I need it to handle from there. All right. All right. Let's go in and sort of wrap this up. Talk about properties, menus. All right, supplementing IntelliSense. So I talked about my builder session. Builders tool, the toolbox, macros, all these are productivity enhancers to speed up things, speed up your development, shortcut things, and help you type less, do more within the editors, within the designers, and so on. IntelliSense X is a VFPX project that Jim Nelson created. I'm not going to demo it. It does a lot of stuff. It basically is taking ISX, which is a project that Christoph created. And what Jim did is he took ISX and put it into Thor. It's something you can toggle on and off. It takes IntelliSense to another level. It will display a list of available parameters, variable names, declared and undeclared via the M dot. Where I could do M dot in the command window, you can do M dot in the editors and with IntelliSense X. It'll display a list of constants. It'll display field names from tables and cursors when you're editing code in the code window, not just the command window. It can display field names from an object related via scatter name command. It can display a list of field names from a remote SQL table. Displays members, properties, events, and methods as you type code. Normal IntelliSense handles this much of the time, but IntelliSense handles it within with end with without the as clause. I didn't even demonstrate that. If you have a with end with block, you can do an as and then the object name or class name, and it will do IntelliSense based on it, very much like the local as definition. It displays a list of tables and views within a database, which you can see within the command window, but it does it within the programs and so on. There's a lot of stuff that IntelliSense X does. My is an implementation of IntelliSense that's data-driven from a different perspective of namespaces. I'm going to just show you really quickly what that is, because I don't think my gets enough street publicity within the community. It was originally generated or driven from the my namespaces within .NET, trying to bring the Windows API down to Visual FoxPro developers without writing a bunch of code. The my namespaces allows you to do that pretty rapidly. It comes with its own help file. I'm not going to go through that, but it really does give you in-depth various things that expose, and it's all well documented within the help file. So all you have to do is declare my as a variable name as my. You have to, of course, set up a path to run it at runtime. Once you create an instance of my from the my VCX, you can start using my IntelliSense built in. It's its own IntelliSense file that drives this. It also gives you kind of an implementation of runtime IntelliSense within your own applications as well. So low my dot, and now I have the 5 categories. So if I want dot user, and I want to display the display name of the user, that gives me the full IntelliSense to drill down to that. If I run it, shows me my time, which came from clock. It didn't display my username, which maybe that's a good security thing. I don't have it defined yet. Ignore. Some of my favorites. One of my favorites was converting local to Greenwich Mean Time or Universal Time. .app, all the .app properties. So you got the info, and then all the things that you can compile into your executables, which is kind of nice to have. Anyways, you get the idea. But really, all this is a shortcut, and behind the scenes is all the Windows API calls necessary to execute the code and return the values that you're trying to get. So that's pretty much what my is. All right, running up on the 2-hour point. Let's get wrapped up. How do you get the code? All right. I mean, all the code examples I showed you, a lot of them were mine. And all those are in the practical IntelliSense examples.dbf. Okay. All you have to do is open up FoxCode, append from my table. If you want to filter out some items that you don't want, or you can delete them later, that's how you can do that. Mike Potcher provided oxfoxcode.dbf. I haven't demonstrated any of Mike's examples, but if you want, you can take a look at his. He has a bunch of other shortcuts as well. He has 2 DBFs. Those are in a folder underneath the examples. And then Paul Marzowski has, I don't know, half a dozen, maybe 8 different examples available that are in a PRG that you can run, and that's available to you as well if you want to take a look at that. Resources. Even in 2 hours, I did not cover everything that's in the white paper. Okay, so please take an opportunity to read the white paper. It is 80 pages. There are lots of images, lots of pictures. So it's not 80 pages of information to read, but it's a lot of good information. It goes into more detail than I could go into. It also has links in there to Doug Hennig's white paper on IntelliSense. Absolute treasure is Andy Kramick's white paper that is only available through the Wayback Machine. And there's also a chapter in the What's New in 9 book that talks about all the IntelliSense enhancements that were done in VFP 9. again, the rehearsal went more than 2 hours, which is almost 2 full sessions. I've done as long as 2.5, 3 hours as well in rehearsing long before I actually did a session. So in summary, you got your base IntelliSense from Microsoft, but that's not the only thing that you have to deal with. You can expand upon and see way past what Microsoft ever delivered, not only in command expansions and your general IntelliSense features, you updating the bugs that they have in some of their tool tips and so on. You can literally expand Visual FoxPro or extend Visual FoxPro with property sheet extensions, with menu extensions, and so on. It's way more than what Microsoft ever intended. And my only request is if you really do some of this stuff, blog about it, post it up, get it involved in some stuff in VFPX. However, you can share your experiences, your ideas to inspire other developers, because that's all I'm really trying to do today is inspire you to build your own IntelliSense scripts to save you time, to increase your productivity. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this session, all 2 hours and 5 minutes or so of it. I'm really happy that you took the time to do that. I hope that you found it inspiring. For those who attended the conference, if you get a chance before we close down our evaluation site, please fill out an evaluation. You'll find it in the 8 o'clock slot, which is not a slot that we had during the conference. But we have that session available for you to give me feedback, both constructive and any kudos or positive feedback that you have for me. I appreciate it. Again, my name is Rick Schumer. I'm from White Light Computing. I'm also an organizer of the Virtual Fox Fest conference as well as Southwest Fox. I hope you guys are able to attend our future conferences. If you have any questions about this session or about the conferences, you can email me. My email address is on the screen right now. Thanks and have a great day.